I'm conscious about time because this is taking, with the translation, we're going very slowly, but I want to emphasize another important principle of international law that I think you also need to be aware of. So, state succession. A very important question that would happen if you had a successful referendum and if you proclaimed independence would be the question of state succession. And it is quite an important issue because it is about how assets and liabilities, archives and other things of Spain would be divided between you and Spain. And the key different categories that would be relevant in the case, if it happened, would be dissolution or secession. And it's very important to understand the consequences of the two because they are different. And they are different in a very important regard, and that is with regard to membership of international organizations. And the European Union is such an organization.
Un altre principi important que l'Anna vol explicar és el principi de la successió d'estats que es dona quan un estat es separa o s'independitza d'un altre. I aquest principi és important de conèixer perquè limita o defineix com es reparteixen els actius entre l'anterior estat i el nou estat que acaba de néixer. Si Catalunya s'independitzés d'Espanya, seria un cas de successió d'estats o dissolució d'estats. Ja ens explicarà la diferència.
Okay, the question, if we go to the next slide. Oh, no, actually we can stay. The question is not a question of law. It's again a question of fact. So it's not something that will be decided in international law. It's something that will be decided either by agreement between Spain and Catalonia, or there will be different opinions. In case of former Yugoslavia, there was difference of opinions. In the case of former Yugoslavia, Slovenia, Croatia, and Bosnia insisted that it was a case of dissolution, and Serbia insisted it was a case of secession. They wanted to keep the name Yugoslavia. They kept the name Yugoslavia for a long time, and they insisted on remaining the members of the United Nations, and they insisted on remaining members of the IMF. They insisted on paying the debts. And why? Because the assets are always greater than the debts, even probably in the case of Spain.
En el cas de la dissolució de l'ex-Iugoslàvia, aquest tema de si es tractava una successió o una dissolució va haver de ser negociada. Sèrbia defensava que fos una successió d'estats, mentre que la resta de nous estats, com Croàcia o Eslovènia, defensaven que fos una dissolució. Per què Sèrbia defensava que fos una successió? Perquè si és una successió, se consideraria llavors a Sèrbia l'estat successor de l'ex-Iugoslàvia. Això voldria dir que Sèrbia es quedaria dins de les mateixes organitzacions internacionals on Iugoslàvia estava i es quedaria la major part del pastís a l'hora de repartir els actius. En canvi, si fos una dissolució, la repartició és més equitativa, com explicarà ara.
But I'm not, because we don't have time and I don't want to concentrate on the debts and assets, I want to emphasize the importance of the European Union in this case. So as Albert said, there are no provisions in the Lisbon Treaty on what happens in the case of succession or an independent state. There are Article 49 and 50, I think, we've moved, which talk about accession, and that's Article 49. And then there's Article 50 that talks about withdrawal. There is no articles on what happens in a case of dissolution or a succession of states. It's, in my view, very important to understand the difference between the two. If the case of Catalonia and Spain is a case of secession, Spain automatically stays in the European Union, and your question is unclear, because there is no provision, but for Spain there is no doubt that Spain remains in the European Union. However, if it's a case of dissolution, the situation is unclear for both. Much better argument.
Okay. Tal com ha dit Albert Royo abans, en els tractats de la Unió Europea no s'estableix res sobre, en el cas de que un territori d'un estat se separi, seria un cas de dissolució o de successió. L'article 49 ens parla de l'accés de nous estats i l'article 50 ens parla de la retirada voluntària de nous estats. Llavors, no hi ha cap article que ens digui si això seria un cas de successió o de dissolució. Si fos un cas de successió, no hi ha dubte que Espanya es quedaria sent un membre de la Unió Europea i es quedaria bona part dels actius. En canvi, si fos un cas de dissolució, la situació quedaria molt poc clara i això donaria molt més marge de joc a Catalunya a l'hora de negociar.
Okay, I think we'll just hurry up, so we'll go to the next slide. What is, again, relevant for the purposes of understanding independence within the European Union is also the internal aspects of national law. And here I've given you, there's two things that are relevant. One is constitutional law, clearly extremely important, and the other ones are going to be rules of democracy, rule of law, and so on. And I will talk to those in a moment. I've given you here the wording of the Yugoslav Constitution of 1974, and you will see very clearly that the republics had the right to self-determination, including the right to secession. So you would have thought that an agreement to separate would have been easy. It's in the Constitution. You won't be surprised that constitutional lawyers on both sides disagreed. And the argument posed by the Serbian constitutional lawyers was that this right was consumed when they entered into the Union. So what I want to say is that I don't think it really matters. I mean, it matters, of course, extremely important what the Constitution says, but that is not where the will of the people is found. Now, if we move to the Acts of Union, and I think a lot of the time people in Catalonia say people in Scotland have it very easy. And they think that that easiness comes from the Constitution or the document that says that. Now, if you see the wording of the Acts of Union, it talks about the Union being forever. It does not envisage the possibility of Scotland leaving the Union. Again, the right is not of Scotland to leave is not written in the Constitution in itself. However, it's premised on the fact that there were two kingdoms, Kingdom of England and Kingdom of Scotland. So in the same way as when you have a marriage and you have two people get together and they say they will be together forever, and that's what the document says, they can also change their mind and change their relations and have good relations after a divorce. If we move... I think that I don't want to, let's not translate it because I don't think we have time. So let me talk about the Spanish Constitution. And the reason why I've done it in this way is so that you can see the wording, the famous Article 1 and Article 2. I think the key for me is Article 1. I know you concentrate on Article 2, but for me, Article 1.3 is the key of the Constitution of Spain. And it says that the sovereignty of the sovereignty vests in the Spanish people. Okay? You probably know that.
A veure, també cal tenir en compte, al moment de parlar de la secessió i la creació de nous estats, els aspectes del dret intern de cada estat. Ara ens fixarem en el dret constitucional de cada estat. En el cas de Iugoslàvia, la Constitució federal reconeixia el dret de successió, però quan Eslovènia i Croàcia van declarar-se independents, els juristes serbis a favor de la Unió de Iugoslàvia van dir que aquest dret es va acabar quan es va crear la Unió de Iugoslàvia. Sempre es pot interpretar segons com vols. En el cas de l'Act of Union entre Anglaterra i Escòcia, de principis del segle XVIII, es mencionava que aquesta unió era per a sempre i no mencionava que Escòcia pogués marxar d'aquesta unió. La clau per la qual s'ha aprovat un referèndum a Escòcia a nivell constitucional intern seria que es reconeix a nivell intern de la Gran Bretanya que són dos regnes separats, Escòcia i Anglaterra. Hi ha una qüestió clau també que he volgut mencionar a Ana Stanic, que és que encara que les constitucions diguin que les unions són per a sempre o són sagrades, la gent ha de poder canviar d'opinió tal com se pot canviar d'opinió en una boda, en un matrimoni. I llavors també entra ja a parlar del tema de la llei interna d'Espanya, que és la Constitució, mencionant el que per allà és la clau principal, que és l'article 1.3. L'article 1.3 de la Constitució espanyola diu que la sobirania nacional resideix en el poble espanyol del qual emenen els poders de l'Estat.
Okay. If we go to the next slide, Jordi. Next slide. Okay. Here I want to look at particularly the decision of the Supreme Court of Quebec. The Supreme Court of Quebec was asked to determine whether Quebec had a right to unilateral secession. It held very important things. Again, it repeated that the sovereignty rests with the people. It said that the supremacy of the sovereign will of the people potentially can be expressed by the people of Quebec to lead to unilateral secession. They said that the fundamentals of a state is that it's consent to be governed. So we, the people, give the state the consent to be governed. And everything has to be done within the confines of the rule of law. And what does that mean? Now, what the Supreme Court of Quebec said, and I think this is how, if I was on the Spanish Constitutional Court, I would say the same. The Constitution is not just a written text. It evolves over time. Its provisions, and this is a quote, have to be read within the constitutional context. And Jordi, if you go to the next page. It says, and that context, for the point of view of Quebec, were principles of federalism. Okay, we arguably don't have that here, but I actually think you do have it. You have something, not federalism, but you have autonomous provinces. So it's not a unitary state in a simple sense of the word in Spain. In any event, you have democracy, you have constitutionalism. Now, what the court concluded in the case, and this is in the case of Canadian national law, this is not international law, but national law, said there is no right to unilateral secession. However, if there is a clear majority of people in Quebec who vote in a referendum, that gives rise to a right to negotiate and a right and an obligation on the rest of the country to negotiate either a new constitutional arrangement or, if there's no agreement, the right to Quebec to secede.
Un altre aspecte del dret intern que s'ha de conèixer, a part de la regulació constitucional, són els principis democràtics, els principis de l'estat de dret i els principis de drets humans en els quals es mou aquest estat. L'Anna Stanic es comenta el cas del Canadà. Quan el Quebec va demanar fer un referèndum d'autodeterminació, el Tribunal Constitucional canadenc va dir no existeix un dret a la secessió unilateral. En cas que hi hagi un referèndum i que aquest referèndum surti positiu, això estableix un dret del Quebec a negociar amb la resta de la federació. I això donaria dret o bé a un nou pacte constitucional o, en el cas de que no s'arribi a un nou pacte constitucional, donaria un dret a la secessió.